Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, obviously Herschell needs no introduction from me. He'll give you a little chat. If any of you want to ask any questions afterwards, he'll be available. And then after that, if you want anything signed, if you form a queue down this side, there's posters and photographs in the front if you haven't got anything. If you had, form a queue down this side, he'll do the signing. Ladies and gentlemen, Herschell Gordon Lewis.
I am truly honored. I never expected to be in this theater today. I salute you for having me here, you maniac. Well, fellow Gorehounds, I will tell you a little something or other, and then by all means, if you have questions, no matter how revolting or embarrassing they might be, feel free to ask them. The movies they're showing here tonight are what? She-Devils on Wheels and Something Weird? Or is it the Gruesome Twosome? Gruesome Twosome, good. She-Devils on Wheels, as you may or may not know, came somewhat late in the cycle of these things. The first one we ever made was a picture called Blood Feast. Blood Feast caught the motion picture industry literally unaware. There never had been a movie like Blood Feast. Until Blood Feast, people died peacefully with their eyes shut. Blood Feast was the first movie in which people died with their eyes open, which, by the way, is the way most people die. And I'm sure you know that. If no other way from looking in the mirror. It was also obviously the first movie in which a brain was ripped out of this actress's head, or it's where the brain would have been had she had any. It was the first movie in which we tore the leg off a girl, or ripped the heart out of one. And when we made this picture, censor boards were nonplussed. They knew how to deal with obscenity. They knew how to deal with nudity. They didn't know how to deal with gore. They'd never seen anything like this before, nor had we. In fact, when we were cutting this movie, in my cutting room, I said to my then partner, Dave Friedman, what are we going to do with this thing? Maybe we can show it at a midnight show on Halloween, but what theater is going to play this kind of movie? Because people who would wander into the cutting room and who would see this beat-up work print with chicken scratch and grease pencil all over it, they couldn't watch it all the way through. And not because it was as bad a movie as it was because the effect was something they hadn't seen before. So we decided to open this picture in a little town in Illinois called Peoria. Our theory was, if we died in Peoria, who would know about it? And Dave and I took the pledge. We were not going to go near that town. It was driving distance from Chicago, where I then lived. I'm pleased to tell you I now live in Florida, where the sun always shines. Anyway, it opened on a Friday, and Saturday we couldn't stand it anymore. We said, well, let's go see what's happening. We just caved in. And we drove down to Peoria, and as we drove near the theater, there was this blockade on the highway with the state police directing traffic. I thought there had been an accident. Well, there was an accident, all right. It was our movie. The theater was at a 1,000-car drive-in. It was packed. And if you know how people used to go into a drive-in theater, there'd be 4 people sitting in it and 8 more in the trunk where they didn't have to pay for them. And from its very inception, this motion picture, this little nothing that we had shot in a town called Miami Beach, which is a resort area on the planet Mars. This movie, much to my own astonishment, forever changed the course of motion picture history. Because following Blood Feast, people died with their eyes open. And as the Latter-day Saints came into the arena with their exploding clothing and their mandibles and their prosthetic devices, Blood Feast was the natural father of all these bastard children that came in afterwards. And I think, in a sense now, I didn't think so at the time. I will admit to you, I thought then and I think now, the whole thing is somewhat laughable.
Oh, my Ishtar. This is silly.
But at the time, I did not think that we had achieved the position in history that we seem to have done. In those days, I was simply a schmuck with a camera.
So what do we do? Well, we got sound, let's shoot it.
Oh, you fellas understand sound, don't you? First, we turn on the recorder, and when the camera starts, you go like this.
Okay, I'll do it. Right. Roll 'em. Where'd you hear that? Whoa, don't you roll something? Isn't that the way it goes?
CB always said camera.
Camera?
Right. Okay, she's rolling.
Scene 81, take one.
And the mainstream filmmakers looked aghast at this nothing picture with no name value and no stars anybody had ever heard of, taking playing time away from them. Who are these people? Well, the difference was, even today, I see some of the very slick slasher films being made. I like the word gore better than I like the word slasher, because slasher sounds like hit and run. Gore sounds like you take somebody's guts in your hands and squeeze them. That's gore. Anyway, yeah, you're one of us. Bring your guts over and I'll autograph them. Anyway, I said to Dave Friedman, what would happen if we made a good one? Now, Blood Feast is like a play by Aeschylus. It is raw, it's primitive, and that's the power in it. It never was intended to be realistic. One of the mistakes I think a lot of motion picture producers make today is trying to make their gore realistic.
Today, television and films give you the luxury of observing grisly dismemberments and deaths without anyone actually being harmed. But ladies and gentlemen, have you ever seen the sight of human butchery in person?
And the audience sits there watching with no involvement because they are so entranced with the devices rather than with, oh my God, yuck, disgusting. The disgusting reaction is an involvement device. The admiration of the effect is a non-involvement device. And that's why even today, as these things get slicker and slicker and higher budgeted, I think they're going in the wrong direction. What we need is a return to good old-fashioned gut pulling. Anyway, I said, what if we made a good one? And we went to a town called St. Cloud, and we shot a movie called 2,000 Maniacs, which is my personal favorite. And I'm stupefied that 2,000 Maniacs can't play in the UK. It doesn't make any sense at all to me.
He threw it.
Well, you got some lines to recite. You gotta say it ain't falling yet.
It hasn't fallen yet.
Well, pardon my grammar. All right, who's next? Hey, wait a minute, folks. We's embarrassing our guests. We ain't showing any marksmanship at all. Yeah. Come over here, Ruth. Come on over.
That last throw was just Walnut. This one is gonna be for keys. Little gal, I'm gonna give you a tip. You can judge this just right. Old Teeter Rock's gonna fall in just 10 seconds.
No! Please let me up.
We have sophisticated society to a point at which many of the ancient taboos have vanished. For example, in the United States, Blood Feast, 2,000 Maniacs, She-Devils on Wheels, and The Wizard of Gore, which is a much rougher picture, have all shown on cable television without creating a murmur. In fact, they've shown repeatedly. If they show once and public outcry causes them to be withdrawn, then one feels that the ancient prejudices still exist. That hasn't happened. And here we are in a much more civilized ambiance. And, gee, I didn't think that was going to draw away. Well, you know more about that than I do. Maybe you travel in different circles. But here we are, and for some reason, the Blue Noses will not allow that picture to be shown. And I feel that 2,000 Maniacs in no way is, one, as gory, two, as stupid as some of the stuff that's being shown today with no licensing problem, whatever. So my suggestion to you is that you accost various members of the censor boards and to show your personal outrage being so affronted, you rip out their guts. Anyway, by the time we got to She-Devils on Wheels, that movie was generated by just a flash reaction of my own, in which I saw a female motorcycle biker going down a lonely highway, and some neurons snapped in my warped and twisted brain. And I said, gee, I don't remember seeing a lot of women on motorcycles. The classic motorcycle picture, and that was a period in which every low-budget company, what we call the sub-majors, movies, companies such as American International, were making biker picture after biker picture, but they were always men. And the women were grabbing the men around the waist and hanging on the rear end. They were always treated as sex objects. And I said, what if we reversed that flow? And the women treat the men as sex objects, which, by the way, is far closer to reality.
How you jacks tonight? Right.
How about it, Queen? Who's lucky enough to get me today?
Keep your pants, Deb, rocking your eagles hanging out. Couple you jacks put my baby to bed, huh? The rest of you lie up against the wall.
Let's get some of this action going here. Pretty nice stuff here today.
Okay, all right, gals. We're gonna auction off the goodies now, right?
Right.
See what we have here. All right. Karen's caught Mama here tonight, and she gets first pick, right?
Right.
What'll it be, honey? Dad? A Bronx? Or, maybe you'll really join the club and pick a filly.
Might we not have a very playable picture? So we ran a little ad in the Miami Herald and asked for women who knew how to ride a big motorcycle and have access to one. That was our primary audition. As you may well know, because you go to the movies, acting talent has nothing to do with someone being a success in the movies. In fact, it's almost a coincidence with some of the actors I've seen around today. Well, you should have seen what came crawling out of the woodwork to audition for us. And we eliminated at once those who, A, could not control a big Harley, a hog we call it, or a Norton or a BMW. We eliminated those who had no access to one.
Look what I got.
Certainly in low-budget film production, one does not show a close-up of a woman at the handlebars and then quickly dress some man in that same outfit for a longer shot showing the thing going off a cliff. That's not the way you do it. You carry the shot with the individual. So there is a verisimilitude, a reality to She-Devils on Wheels that most pictures of that type don't have, because the ones who are in the close-ups are also the same ones who are in the long shots. They ride those bikes. And we had a rollicking good time shooting that movie. There's a scene in She-Devils on Wheels, I don't want to steal my own thunder here, in which, an anecdote coming up. There's a scene in She-Devils on Wheels in which the female motorcycle gang swipes the motorcycle of the head of the male gang, sprays him in the face with insecticide, and delivers what is my favorite line in all the movies I ever made. She sprayed him.
Oh, go fumigate yourself, craphead.
I love that line. Anyway, he chases them on his motorcycle, and then they string a wire across the road neck high, and he runs into it, and his head comes off, which is quite natural. Well, we had this head, and we stuffed it full of glue, and our usual fake eyeballs, and we had an art student in the sculpture division sculpt this head out of paper mache. Now, paper mache is rather fragile, much more fragile than a real head. And the problem I had was it would have cost me too much money to use that guy's real head, which was, by the way, far emptier than the paper mache. Anyway, I had a cameraman named Roy Collodi. If you watch this movie, there's a scene in the movie in which the bikers come into a bar and they accost the bartender and smash his head down. That's Roy Collodi. We used everybody twice. But he was also the cameraman. And for that scene of the head coming through the air, I wanted a slow motion effect. Now, as you may know, 35mm film runs at 90 feet a minute. That's fast. But in slow motion, it runs about 200 or 300 feet a minute, depending on how fast you can crank it up. So that when it plays back far slower. And that's tremendous speed for film in a handheld camera, which is what we had to use for that shot because he had a lie on his back. And the camera really bucks like a machine gun. Well, they threw the head, and Roy lay there, and the thing came at him, and he lost his courage, and the camera swerved aside, ruining the shot. And his head landed in the dirt, and the nose got beat up. So we stuck some mortician's wax on it to try to put the head back together, and the glop was coming out, and we were stuffing that back in. I said, give me that camera. So there I was, and they threw the head, and I followed it down, and I had a brand new pair of white Levi's. And this thing hit me right here. And I said, holy smoke, how am I going to explain this when I go back to the motel? So the problem was not one of the head, the problem was one of the new pair of white Levi's. So I put a towel around myself to go back to the hotel. I went to the laundromat and tried to get this stuff out. Well, we talk about moments that changed one's life. We had a stage blood we had compounded in a little laboratory in Coral Gables, which I felt looked more like blood than blood itself. In fact, if you had a transfusion of this, you'd think you were getting blood until you died 5 minutes. There were two things we didn't tell the actors. One is that the base of this was kaopectate, because we hadn't taken their mouths on occasion. We didn't want to tell them what it was. We thought it was vegetable. But it also had a vegetable dye. And if you ever had a vegetable dye, you know how it's a devil's own job getting this thing out of clothing. So I didn't know what to do. It's not as though we're an actor where it got in his hair. So what? Actors you throw away, like squeezed lemons. This was my own pair of white jeans. So I soaked them in bleach. Nothing happened at all. I said, oh no. But at that time, a new product had just come on the market called Axion. And after trying 3 or 4 items, I soaked them in Axion, and immediately the stuff disappeared. And I felt like Archimedes in the bathtub. Eureka!
Sorry I got blood on your canvas. A lousy nail was sticking up out of it. Easy, mister. Hey, it's too early for breakfast.
You mean that's blood?
Well, it isn't unless I got tomato juice in my veins. What's the matter, Lord Master? You can't be nervous again. It's only 8 o'clock in the morning.
Come here, I want to see something.
You mean you really care? I don't believe it.
I want to see this. It's a great color.
Thanks a lot.
Listen. It's important. I want to try something. Let me go for that cut. Just for a minute.
Oh, he wants blood.
My whole life changed. Now I knew I could put this in actor's hair before the last day of shooting, where I wouldn't have to wait 8 months for it to grow out again. It was literally a change for me to come across Axion. If someone said, what was the biggest thing you discovered in filmmaking? Axion. She Devils was a lot of fun to shoot. It was a tough picture to shoot because there's action all the way, it's motion all the way. There were times when I would sit on the back of a motorcycle, shooting the motorcycle coming at me, facing backwards, afraid I was going to fall off onto the cement tarmac. We shot much of that at an unused airport that had been built for World War II. It was called Amelia Earhart Field. It's probably now a subdivision. And it had a long, long runway which enabled us to shoot what we wanted to shoot. A rough, tough picture. The Gruesome Twosome is a different ball game altogether. That was I felt, a charming little picture about a little woman an old woman who has a wig shop, and her idiot son who lives in the basement gives her the makings to make these wigs. I may be talking too long. If you have a question, I'm very pleased to answer it. Does anyone have a question? Yes, sir. I can't see you because of the arrangement of lights, but I'm certainly listening. Oh, there you are.
Something about censorship. Have you ever met James Stone?
Have I ever met a censor in this country?
Yeah.
I have met many of them, but they're not official. I'm being funny. No, I have no relationship with the censor situation here. All I know is what Jim Maslin, who distributes these pictures, has told me, which is that it's an impossible circumstance in England. Now, I know for years these pictures have circulated on an underground basis. But that in itself is outrageous. Nobody seems to have been corrupted more than you already have been corrupted. If you weren't corrupt, you wouldn't be here, nor would I. By this, I have no problem accosting a censor if one happens to arrive, because what I bring to the arena is lack of reverence for that kind of dogmatic morality which tries to superimpose itself on other people. I resent that deeply. Question? Yes, sir.
Why did you stop making gore films?
Why did I stop making gore films? The industry had changed. The last movie I made was one called The Gore Girls, which was almost, it's the roughest picture I ever made. There are scenes in there I can't even describe it with this microphone, but some of you have recorders going. But it was we began to parody ourselves. And the problem with gore films is, what do you do for an encore? All right, we rip the brains out of somebody's head and we tear the leg off of somebody. What do we do next? Well, we roll somebody down a hill in a barrel full of spikes and rips into pieces. And we have somebody pulled apart by 4 horses, and we drop a great big rock. Okay, what do you do after that? Well, we pound a stake through somebody's head, and the brains come out the ear. All right, well, what do you do after that? Well, we take out an eyeball and squeeze it on a close-up until all the stuff just squirts out. Well, what do you do after that? And you reach a point at which, in the kind of effect we did, there's very little left to say. Remember, please, if you saw the original Indiana Jones picture called Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's an effect in there. That effect cost 20 times what all my pictures together cost. That's the one where the skin is literally stripped off the face as they open the ark. If you saw the original Alien, where the thing jumps out of the man's chest with certain gouts of blood, that one effect costs considerably more. And I admire the effects, but I don't react to them the way I react to squeezing an eyeball. The difference is between extensive gore and intensive gore. So by the time we made the Gore Girls, the industry had changed dramatically. We made Blood Feast, and we had the entire universe to ourselves. Nobody was making this kind of picture. Nobody could understand this kind of picture, and the entire industry did not know why people were coming to see it. People did come to see it. Some people came 5, 6, 8 times. They would steal the posters off the front of the theater lobby. By the time we made the Gore Girls, we had already had several Halloweens, several Fridays the 13th, I don't know how many houses on Elm Street. It was no longer a novelty. The bigger companies had moved in and were taking the playing time away from us. And I felt it was time to get out. Who is a prophet? Who can predict? Here were 2 guys who had originated the character Superman. A man named Jerry Siegel, a man named Joe Shuster. And they sold out when Superman went into eclipse for a few $1,000s. Now Superman makes a great big revival. And they are claiming, we want ours. They sold out. They're out of it. At the time I got out of the business, who knew that we'd have cable? Who knew we'd have video cassettes? My gosh, Blood Feast in the last year and a half or so has sold about 150,000 cassettes. And that's what they reported. If you know the video cassette business, If they reported 150,000, that means they sold at least 300,000. This is a scoundrel's business. You may know that. The motion picture industry is shot through with people who can take the chips off the table at Las Vegas and the croupier never even sees them. It's a rough, tough business. But that's why. I felt the thing had contracted upon us. And I admit to you, I didn't have the vision to anticipate what's happening here today, for which, by the way, I am grateful. This is a wonderful experience for me. Question? Yes, sir.
You can see how much your films are in demand and how much people like them. And you can see it's a marketplace by the fact there are people here today. So why don't you make another?
Interesting question. The question is, why don't I make another? I don't make another because the deal has not yet come to pass. Let me tell you what happens in the motion picture industry. People want to get their names in the trade papers, in Variety. They will announce a project and then forget about it. Their names are in Variety. That's all they care about. That's their fodder for the day. There are others in the business who are like Micawber in David Copperfield. They live in the paraphrastic tense. Things are about to happen. They are about to make a movie. I know one fellow who has called me every month for the last 4 years. He is about to make Blood Feast 2. But it's like, there's a story by Albert Camus called The Plague, in which the plague assaults this town in North Africa. And there's a man writing a book, and he's written his first sentence. And the plague comes and the plague goes, and he's still polishing his first sentence. This fellow is still planning to make a movie. About 5 years ago, a fellow came to me and said, write a screenplay. And he paid me to write the screenplay. It was called Herschell Gordon Lewis's Grim Fairy Tales. And it never came to pass. I still had the screenplay. It's just the nature of the business. My answer is, if the right deal comes up at the right time, I am not invisible. If the right deal does not come up, I'm not hurting. But there is no real answer to your question, except it hasn't happened. Is there a question back? Yes, sir.
Where did you get the money for your first film?
Where I got the money for my first film was right here. One of the differences between independent production and major company production is they are self-financed. That's in fact a very good argument for low-budget pictures. That's why on Blood Feast, which was well, that wasn't my first film, it was the first gore film. I'll come back to your question has two answers to it. On Blood Feast, I was the director, I was the cameraman, and I wrote the music. And in fact, in Blood Feast, there's this kettle drum theme. I'm playing the kettle drums. And not out of ego. In fact, in many of these cases, I didn't use my own name. I came to the conclusion that every exhibitor in the motion picture industry was named either Sheldon or Seymour. So I made up the name Sheldon Seymour, figuring they could all identify with it. And I figured they see that name and they booked the picture, and some of them did. So on some of these pictures, you'll see music by Sheldon Seymour. In fact, I think you'll see it on She Devils on Wheels. But they were self-financing. I didn't have any front office to call and say, well, I need another $1 million to make this picture. I don't have no negative. Who was I going to call? Myself? That's the second half of the answer. The first half is this. When I first got into this business, I had a commercial film studio in Chicago, a town I don't wish on anybody. And somebody said to me, how do you make any money in your business? I said, the only way I make money in the film business is to make features. He said, well, why don't you make features? And I had no answer. So it's like an O. Henry story. I rounded up some friends, and I sold the studio to get my end of the money together. We formed a company called Mid-Continent Films. Mid-Continent made 2 movies. One was called The Prime Time, and the other was Living Venus. And we had a finite amount of money we had raised, some of which was mine, some of which was other people's. Well, as would happen, the distributor of those movies went bankrupt without having remitted the film rentals. And here I had no studio, and I had no company. And in fact, I had no friends because they had all invested in this thing along with me. One of the many low points in one's career. So that is when I began to think it's not a good idea to have friends invest in a movie. I also came to the conclusion it wasn't a good idea for me to invest in it, but I had no other choice. And I was literally out of business. And I had no nest egg left. And it was a little nothing picture called The Adventures of Lucky Pierre that brought me back to life in the film business. Lucky Pierre was a phenomenon. Dave Friedman, who became my partner for a while after that, had worked for the film distributor who went bust. And he was out of a job. And he came to me one day and he said, hey, there's a fellow in Dallas, Texas, who will pay us a couple of $1,000s if we can make a one-reel, he called it QT movie. One reel was about 1,000 feet of film, which runs about 11 minutes. I said, gee whiz, let's do it. Because there were no terrors left for me in the film business. That's one of the benefits of having been in it from a commercial point of view. I knew how to shoot a picture, I knew how to cut a picture, I knew how to score a picture, I knew how to sync up the sound. And we made Lucky Pierre with 2 people on the crew. Dave Friedman was the producer and sound man, and I was the director and cameraman. And the reason we shot a full-length picture instead of the one-reeler was I was discussing this with a laboratory with whom I did business. And the lab man, who became an architect of destiny, said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you'll make a full-length picture, I will give you a deferment on the laboratory costs until 90 days after the answer print is delivered, which meant I could have this picture in release, and the laboratory was by far the biggest cost. I had no crew cost, I was it. So we decided to make Lucky Pierre, and the picture was an instant smash. I was back in the business. Question anywhere? Do I have a special message that does not end, it's not 2 words and doesn't end in the word you? A special message for everybody here? I'm sorry, I missed your question.
Are you trying to say we should be less violent for your films? Are you trying to say...
Oh, did the films have a message? I would hate to think that. These messages, now I understand your question. Each film had one and only one intention. That's the reason they have survived. Look back in time at some of the contemporary big budget movies that were released at the same time our pictures were excreted. They vanished. They don't sell any videos, they don't show up on cable, they're gone. These little things have survived, and I think it's because the entire message, if that be the word, was to entertain people. I had no sociological overtones to the stuff I shot. Yes, I thought it was a good idea to have a female motorcycle gang, but it didn't have in it the sociological seeds that I would like to claim. They were pure entertainment. That was my intention, to entertain people. And I guess that did succeed over a period of time. And I don't want to disappoint you with that answer, but anything else I would say would be both pompous and a lie.
Is there one effect that you always want to do?
There's an effect that I want to do? Yes, there is. What an astute question. The question is this: there an effect I wanted to do and didn't do? Yes, the ultimate effect, we called it. We were shooting a movie called The Wizard of Gore. And if ever there were a jinx picture, that was it. God finally frowned on us. Example, I had an assistant cameraman named Ray Craig who loved to tinker with the cameras. Now, one thing we did, our main camera was a great big 35mm Mitchell, which weighs 8 tons. But the benefit of it was, in those days, in the drive-in theaters, which were our principal outlets, you could sit in the back row of a 1,000-car drive-in and have a rock-steady picture, because that Mitchell movement ran like a Swiss watch. And Ray Craig was forever taking the camera apart and putting it back together. If you know the mechanics of motion picture production, you know that what happens is a pair of claws comes out, grabs the film, pulls it down. It's held for 1/50th of a second while the lens opens up, and then it goes and another frame comes down. That's the interval. And these series of still pictures, 24 per second, each of which lasts 1/50th of a second, is what causes the illusion of motion. Ray put the claw mechanism in half a frame down. So we were shooting the pull-down mechanism. By the time I learned that, we had shot for 2 days, and here we were on a fixed budget. That was the second thing that had happened. The first thing that happened was I had a partner on that picture named Fred Sandy, an old irascible crab. And Fred liked to play producer. We gave him the title executive producer. When you see on a motion picture, executive producer and a name, all it means is somebody with a lot of money who has no business being on the set. Well, the first day that we showed up at the first location, Fred Sandy got into a big argument with the fellow who was playing the lead. And the fellow said, I don't need this, and he stalked off. Such is my reverence for actors that I picked somebody off the crew and made him the Wizard of Gore. And it wasn't... actually, the fellow was Ray Sager, who was an actor who worked on my crew when he wasn't acting, and we would always give him a part somewhere. I didn't expect him to play the lead. The problem I had with Ray Sager in The Wizard of Gore is he was the least dexterous person I had ever met in my life. He could pick up this glass, and I guarantee you there'd be water all over the stage. And he was supposed to play the Wizard of Gore, the magician. Well, in this movie, I also had, at the time, an Aunt Jane. Everybody has an Aunt Jane in his family. I had one. And Aunt Jane called me and said, Roger Strauss wants to, by the way, don't print much of this because these people do exist. Change the names, for God's sake. I don't want to get sued. Except for Ray Sager, he's always looking for publicity. Roger Strauss wants to work on your crew. And he studied film at school. God spare me from people who study film at school. They all want to be auteurs. I said, all right, you're wrong. She also said that Roger Strauss was my cousin, and I was pleased I had not met him before. So I always did the electrical hookups, not out of ego. Anybody who makes an electrical hookup out of ego has something wrong up here. But I had had an experience in the Hilton Hotel in which the electrician who hooked us up blew out all the elevators in that hotel for 2 hours and got us thrown out. And I wasn't going to have that happen again. That was in Blast Off Girls, he did that. Anyway, we always used a 220-volt line, and we hooked it behind the boxes because all people cared about when we shot on location was two things. One, will my television pictures shrink? Which is what happens when the voltage gets down. And two, will my air conditioner go off? Which is what happens if you hook in on the other side of the line when there's not enough power to run your lights and the various appliances in the house. So, sure enough, we were shooting in an apartment on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, and Roger Strauss said, look, you're very busy. I know how to make these hookups. And like the damn fool I am, I said, okay, if you know what you're doing, remember the green is the ground. Well, that was just too much for his brain to carry. We had an effect plan, which I'll describe in a moment, the ultimate effect. And Roger Strauss quite nicely started a fire in that electrical box. They had to call the fire department, and they threw us out. And I'm going to get thrown out of here too, but let me just tell you what that effect was, because one day, we're going to make that effect. And that effect is simply taking a human body with a camera not moving and cutting away and tearing it to pieces. And that was I knew how to do it. We had a goat carcass ready for it. But because they threw us out, I couldn't match the location. And we had to forego that effect. But someday, when the moon is full and the wolf bane grows in the meadow, you are going to see on somebody's screen, if it's one of you who have heard this and pick up the torch, a human body cut to pieces before your very eyes. Folks, thank you very, very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Herschell.
films have a certain historical value. People want to see how it all began. And this is how it all began, with movies like Blood Feast.
Yes, I've just seen the scene where Gruesome Twosome, where the guy gets a little tiny electro knife.
An electric knife, yeah.
Yes.
Well, she says, Rodney's been a good boy,
Yes.
and Mother has a present for you, an electric knife. We thought that was very funny. And in fact, in theaters, at the time, nobody laughed. We had the audiences like this, and they didn't know whether to laugh or not, even though the Gruesome Twosome is done with high good humor. But in today's audience, it's an indication of the sophistication of audiences over the period of years. They do laugh at the proper time.
Yeah, because...
I promise to be a good boy always and listen to Mother so that I can live here forever and never have to go away to the place for bad boys.
Oh, that's splendid, dear. That's fine. And now that you've been such a good boy, Mother has a present for you. An electric knife. And now Mother will tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful girl named Rapunzel with long, beautiful golden hair. She was such a love.
Let's go back to She-Devils on Wheel. She-Devils on Wheel, it's a feminist movie, one could say.
A family movie?
No, feminist.
Oh, a feminine movie, yes. Well, it's a feminist movie,
Feminist
yes.
movie. Yes, but I don't think it's an apology for the violence against women in the other four films.
Oh, today I think people are much too sensitive about sexism in movies. They say, why did you kill women in movies? Why didn't somebody stab men? Well, in 2000 Maniacs, I had a man pulled apart by 4 horses. I had another fellow roll down a hill with a barrel full of nails. It wasn't as though we singled out women, but that's what the theater audience of the time wanted to see, just as theater audiences of the time, I felt, had become a little jaded with a typical motorcycle gang. It was always a tough bunch of people, of men. And the what-if factor came to my mind, really, when I saw, almost accidentally, driving down a back highway somewhere, a tough-looking woman on a motorcycle. And in fact, I wasn't sure it was a woman. And it turned out that it was. I said, gee, that's an idea, and that's what the germ was. And audiences reveled in it. A bunch of women beating up on men.
So you hired actual members of the Iron Cross biker gang?
Heck, I did. I wouldn't go near those people. Where did you hear that?
I don't know. I think I just read it.
Well, if you want to repeat that calumny in print, be my guest. But no, what we did was this. We hired, we ran an ad in the Miami Herald, a small ad, 2 inches, asking for women who could ride a big motorcycle. Not a little Honda, a Harley, a Hog they call it, or a Norton, or a BMW, something with some CCs in it. And you should have seen what came out of the walls answering that call. We had 100 from which to choose. We cared less about their acting ability, although some of them aren't bad. They're all in character, you see. That's one of the benefits of having dialogue which is in character. It makes no difference whether they can act or not, because this is the kind of thing they would say anyhow. We cared about whether they could actually ride these bikes. Later, I learned in some of the major company products, what they would do is put a woman on the bike for the close-ups. And then a man in the same identical costume would actually do the stunts. We didn't want that. We wanted shots as they were riding. So these women had to be able to drive these bikes, and that's what we wanted, and that's what we got. Now, the men, that was no trouble. But we certainly didn't have any organized gang, at least not to my knowledge. That kind of thing, that can blow a movie out of the water, because all you need is these fellas to say, I've had enough of this, and start breaking up the cameras and the crew, for that matter.
You shot She-Devils back to back with Just for the Hell of It. I think it's the better movie, demonstrating really rough and cynical hardcore violence.
think you may have a point there. There are two different kinds of movie. Just for the Hell of It is a teenage rebellion picture. Again, much ahead of its time. Because I remember Just for the Now, bear in mind, you've seen these things a lot more recently than I have. Just for the Hell of It, as I remember, oh, I thought I saw a footy tag. Opens with some sort of a party, and somebody dumps a goldfish bowl over some fellow's head, and he takes the bowl and throws it into a mirror, and it starts a general melee that doesn't end until there's nothing left in the room. We first titled that picture Destruction Incorporated. And I felt as we were editing it, that nobody would understand the title. We were masters of titles. I always felt that anybody could aim a camera, but the titles in the campaign. For example, the original title of She-Devils on Wheels was Man-Eaters on Motorbikes. That is the theme song of that, which I wrote under the name Sheldon Seymour. And later, putting the campaign together, I realized that Man-Eaters was a title that some newspapers might reject in the advertising. So we changed it to She-Devils on Wheels, and I'm glad we did. But the two pictures, She-Devils on Wheels and Just for the Hell of It, are different types of pictures. They were never intended to play together, and as far as I know, they never have played together.
You mentioned the first scene of Just for the Hell of It, the party scene. It's one take.
Shot in one take. I'll tell you what we did. We had 3 cameras. We had our Mitchell, which was the big, heavy camera, which is like a Rolls Royce. Nothing can ever go wrong. I shouldn't say that. I once owned a Rolls Royce, and my wife will tell you everything went wrong. But the Mitchell camera was stationed unmoving to make sure we had the shot capture. Then we had an Aeroflex camera, which moved around the railway. But then, in the middle of the crowd, I had a fellow with a handheld time mold, a little handheld spring-wound camera that only held 100 feet of film. And he mingled with the group, just getting shots with his back always to the other 2 cameras, so it wouldn't show the fellow with the camera. But we shot it in one piece. And the instruction was just to keep going until there wasn't a stick of furniture left. Had a good time with that. Then afterwards, we threw all the stuff out in the open alleyway behind that building.
I just read that you are said to have the same attitude towards actors as the late Alfred Hitchcock. Is this true?
Well, Alfred Hitchcock had a number of attitudes toward actors. I share some of his opinions. You see, actors, especially actors in the kind of movies we make, I felt were standard interchangeable parts. I have hard evidence to that effect. That is, if an actor disappeared, we simply replaced that actor or actress with another body. And unfortunately, I think it was a president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, who once said, "When I make a political appointment, I make 99 enemies and 1 ingrate." When we would cast someone, the people who didn't get the part hated us, and the person who got the part ultimately felt that he or she, or in the case of actors, it was a star. And gradually we built a core around us of people with whom we knew we could work, and discarded those who I felt had temperament. The fellow who played the lead in I had him in 2 pictures. He was in Moonshine Mountain, and he was also in Color Me Blood Red. A fine acting talent, but an impossible personality, in my opinion. So I felt that I would rather have a lesser acting talent and a more convivial personality, because we always had a rollicking good time shooting the film. And we always blew our brains out trying to cram as much as we could into a shooting day. And anyone who showed temperament was simply not our kind of person. That doesn't quite parallel Hitchcock's attitude, but it explains why.
If you ever tried.
Adam, you'll get all those paintings wet.
Well, why not? Canvas is used for tanks. Water can't hurt it.
Adam, you're impossible.
Finding it possible, maybe I ought to get another art dealer.
Until you do, here's a present from those moronic art buyers. I don't know better.
Now, you got what you want? Get out. Coffee's cold and I'm an impossible host.
They say that Gauguin was obnoxious, too.
Have you ever tried to hypnotize your actors? Like Werner Herzog, the German director Werner Herzog, hypnotized his actors for hours, and you...
Well, at one time, only once, I had an actor who could not learn his lines. And I thought that perhaps under mild hypnosis he might learn the lines. And I tried, because in those days I was very much involved. I was a member of the Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis, in fact. And it didn't work. It didn't work at all. He simply, it wouldn't take on him. We wound up, in fact, writing his words on his cuff. And I won't even tell you which movie that was, but he would say, good morning. It's now 8 o'clock. Fortunately, he could read. That was a miracle, too.
How did you get Colonel Harlan Sanders to play in Blast Off Girls? I've never seen it, but what is he playing?
He plays Colonel Sanders.
Oh.
What happened was, we always, it's all part of low-budget filmmaking. We would shoot a scene in a restaurant in exchange for that restaurant supplying food for the cast and crew. Now, those who know me well know that I am a fried chicken fanatic. So whenever we could shoot in a fried chicken location, we did. So I contacted, or whoever worked for me contacted the people at Kentucky Fried Chicken to ask if we could shoot, if they wanted to make that swap. Well, they accepted with such alacrity, I regretted not having asked them for money. And 3 days before we shot that scene, it was shot in a fried chicken place, I think in Wilmette, which is a suburb of Chicago. They called and asked if I could write in a part for Colonel Sanders. And I said, well, it's kind of difficult because this is about a rock band and it doesn't quite fit Colonel Sanders' image. And they said, well, figure something for him to do. So I said, all right, not quite sure whether they were going to have the actual man or some stand-in or what, I didn't know. Well, we got there, he was there, and he was already made up by his own makeup man. And he had one of these aggressively jolly personalities that always has irritated me, but that's again, a personal prejudice. Well, we arranged for him to serve the fried chicken to the band that was playing on the lawn, a totally contrived scene. But on the other hand, we had fried chicken for the entire shooting, so it was well worthwhile. And I think I gave him one line to say. Well, he took this very seriously. We didn't. For us, it was a throwaway. And we shot the rehearsal, which thoroughly enraged him because when he said, how many more takes are we doing? I said, we got it. And he was so insistent, we shot one with the camera not running, just to satisfy his ego.
Hey, man, you serve fried chicken?
Do we serve fried chicken? Well, we do serve fried chicken.
Yeah, man? Well, make with about half a dozen orders. I got 5 hungry musicians out there.
Musicians, did you say?
Man, they ain't nuclear physicists.
Oh, and I love music. I'll tell you what, if you set them up and play me some good, soft music, you can have dinners on the house.
Man, you got a deal. Hey, you guys, I just made a deal. Lunch is $1 each if we deliver some music. Good deal, huh? Give me $1.
But we gave him a screen credit. In fact, it showed his logo, the thing with a little white beard. Not his name, just his logo, and then opposite the role he played himself.
Whose idea was it to turn to Sex and Sadism with Herschell, some of the viewers or the Friedmans?
I don't know. It was probably a committee decision. That was a transitional film. Scum of the Earth was shot in glorious black and white. One reason was we weren't sure of the market of this, and I felt that, oh, I shouldn't say that. One frame in that movie was hand-tinted red. At the very end of it, there was an idea we had, and I cut in a clear frame of film into the negative. And when the evil man is chased into the surf in Miami Beach and puts the gun in his mouth and fires, there's one frame of red which would startle people. Just enough, it was almost subliminal, but it was there. That movie, I really don't know whose idea it was now. It's lost in history.
Is it true that you thought as early as 63 of a sex and bondage film like a Nazi slave camp?
No, I had no such notion. That was purely Dave Friedman. And after we parted company, he and a fellow named Bob Cressy, I believe, made such a film.
Love Camp 7 and...
yeah, that was nothing to do with me.
What do you think of these movies?
I think it's a stupid idea.
Stupid idea.
Yeah. That's what you get for asking.
Your dispute with Friedman couldn't have lasted very long because I read that he was around when you shot the lesbian scene in Linda and Abilene. Is it true?
Oh yes, well Dave Friedman and I parted company suddenly, and it was a surprise to me. We had, in a company that, we had 4 partners in a company that made 3 movies. The movies were Blood Feast, 2000 Maniacs, and Colony Blood Red. And the 4 partners were Friedman, a fellow named Sid Reich, R-E-I-C-H, who, out of Rochester, New York, a man named Stan Kohlberg, K-O-H-L-B-E-R-G, and me. We were the partners in these movies. Well, Kohlberg, who owned a theater, or a group of theaters in the Chicago area, had the notion of forming a permanent production company. And he said, look, let's let the money accumulate. We were taking the money by the bushel basket. So we'll show a big bank balance, and I'll have my bank finance a permanent production company. And everybody agreed. Well, then it wound up that Kohlberg made off with the money, and the other 3 of us pursuing him. And I said to Dave, regardless of the outcome of this suit, because if you know the court cases in Chicago, there are 2 problems. One, it takes about 6 or 7 years to get a verdict, and second, the people with political connections are the ones who get the verdict. I didn't want to take that risk because Kohlberg was well connected. So I said, let's make a movie so we have some income during this interregnum. And we agreed to make Moonshine Mountain, because along with fried chicken, I love country music. That was my idea. About 8 days or so before we began to shoot, Dave Friedman disappeared. Couldn't reach him on his phone, was disconnected. And it turned out subsequently that he had settled unilaterally with Kohlberg, leaving Reach and me as the only plaintiffs in the case, and made a deal with a fellow named Dan Sonny to move to California and go into business with Sonny. And he didn't have the courage to tell me, and that really bothered me. So for over, I guess 2 years, Dave Friedman and I did not exchange a word. But then subsequently I felt, well, first of all, Moonshine Mountain is a very good success. And I felt there was no point carrying a grudge. Today, Dave Friedman and I are friends again.
And he showed up at these special scenes.
Oh, yes. Yes, he did.
And he liked it very much.
Yes, he did that too. We shot those in California, where he was living at the time.
Yes, we shot Linda and Abilene at the Spang Ranch.
Yes.
What did you think about all these young people?
Well, we didn't know what crackpots they were. We knew they were somewhat off because, for example, they had a dog, and the dog had a bell around its neck. And every time the dog moved, the bell would ring. It must have driven that dog absolutely crazy. And here was this dog shaking its head, trying to get rid of the bell, and the more it shook its head, the more the bell rang. I said, that's a horribly sadistic attitude. So somebody on our crew went to take the bell off the dog's neck, and one of the people there said, you better not touch that bell, you'll get shot. And so we backed off, but we had no notion of it. It was really funny. When I read subsequently that this was where the Manson gang was, I said, well, it isn't surprising, but yet it was surprising to have been that close to these people. I was glad to get out of there. It was a strange place anyway. Here was a movie set, supposedly a Western ranch. Somebody had strung a bunch of telephone wires. It was terrible. And we had to always shoot down so we wouldn't shoot the telephone wires. And the fellow who ran it was an old movie stunt man who had had a bunch of accidents, and his one hand was doubled over and he couldn't stand up straight. And he had a emblazoned on his shirt, Randy somebody, the world's greatest stunt man, and he was staggering around an odd place.
Mm. You never based your stories on real-life killers as others did, like Hitchcock with Psycho? Or
No, they were pure fantasy.
Mm. Have you ever considered the headlines of the tabloids being stuff versus exploitation?
Oh, it may have had some invisible effect, but I never looked at a headline and said, this would make a good movie, no.
Mm. Your concept to shock the audience is that of the Grand Guignol Theater of Paris. And I've read that you run your own Grand Guignol, the Bloodshed Theater in Chicago in 1968.
You're well, very learned here, yes. We opened a movie, well, it wasn't a movie, it was partly. We opened a little theater in an area of Chicago called Old Town, which is how can I describe it? It's a fashionable version of Soho. And the reason I did, a fellow I knew had an empty building. And he said, why don't we show your kind of movies in this building? I said, why don't we? And I figured it was a lark. And I had a pair of 35mm projectors, which I wasn't using. They were incandescent, which didn't require all the venting that the arc projectors required. And we opened a little theater, and what we would do was we showed, it was a camp thing. We showed